Hey, this is X-Cult Baby with another Atheist Bible reading, and today we're going to be looking at the story of David and Goliath. But before we get started with that, I have a brief announcement. I have finally set up a Patreon account. I'm very excited about it, and if you would like to support my work, please consider becoming a patron. The lowest tier for patrons is $1 a month, and in exchange for that, your name will appear at the end of all of my videos. There are lots of other perks for higher tier patrons, so if you want to see that, definitely please check out my Patreon. Link is in the description. Alright, with that announcement out of the way, let's get into the story. So, the story starts with God sending his prophet Samuel to go to the house of a guy named Jesse to anoint a new king, because the current king of Israel, Saul, is no longer to his liking. So Sam goes to Bethlehem to the house of Jesse, and he looks at his sons and is trying to figure out which one God wants him to anoint, and he sees the oldest one, and he's like, oh yeah, that's the guy, because he's like really tall and stuff. And God's like, look Sam, I'm not picking people based on what they look like, I see their hearts, so go to the next guy, it's not that guy. So Sam moves on to the next youngest and the next youngest, and finally he goes through all like 7 of the sons, and he's like, hey Jesse, is this all your sons? And he's like, oh well, actually I have another one that's out with the sheep in the pasture, but I didn't think that you'd need him. And he's like, well, when I said to bring out all your sons, I kind of meant all of them. So now that we've established that God is not picking his new king based on their looks, Jesse brings David in, and the Bible immediately describes David as a handsome, healthy, young-looking boy with beautiful eyes. And God is like, yeah, that's the guy. So Sam pours some oil on his head to indicate that he has been anointed by God to be the next king of Israel, and he moves on his way. Meanwhile, in the palace of Saul, king of Israel, God has left him with his own spirit, I guess, and has sent an evil spirit to torment him. Now, if you take this verse literally, God is literally just called a demon or some kind of evil spirit entity to torment Saul for the rest of his life, which is pretty messed up. And if you take this metaphorically and you're just like, well, it probably means some kind of psychological distress or mental illness or something like that, because God would never send a demon to torment a guy. That'd be pretty messed up. That'd be pretty terrible. That still means that at the very least, God is subjecting Saul to psychological torment for the rest of his life, so that's really not a whole lot better. I don't know how you interpret that makes God look like a nice, fair guy. I mean, he already anointed another guy to be the next king. You'd think that'd be sufficient punishment, but nah, he just had to take it a step further. So, one of Saul's servants sees that he's being tormented, and he's like, hey, you know what helps me when I'm being tormented by an evil spirit? Harp music. And Saul's like, then get me a harp player. And then one of his other servants is like, oh yeah, I know this guy, son of Jesse, great harp player, brave and mighty warrior, good speaker, and handsome as fuck. He's just fucking great. So Saul sends for David, and he doesn't know that David has been anointed as king. But David starts commuting back and forth between his father's house and Saul's palace to play music for him on his harp. So now the Philistines, the sworn enemies of the Israelites, are preparing to go to war with Israel. So Saul and his army set up on this mountain, and the Philistine army's on this mountain, and there's a valley of space in between them. And this 9.5-foot giant named Goliath comes out from the Philistine camp with some serious armor, and he challenges Israel to send out a champion to fight him. If Goliath defeats their champion, Israelite army will become their slaves. But if the champion defeats Goliath, then the Philistine army will be Israelite slaves. And of course, when Saul and the rest of the Israelite army hear this, they pretty much all shit their pants. Meanwhile, back at home, Jesse sends David out to meet Saul and his army to bring food for his 3 oldest brothers, because they're, in Saul's army fighting for Israel. Well, not actively fighting, since apparently they've been at a standstill for 40 days, but, After David arrives, he happens to see Goliath doing his daily taunting, and the other soldiers are like, yeah, he does that every day. Saul says whoever defeats him is gonna be rich and be able to marry his daughter. And David's like, okay, so why hasn't anybody done it yet? He's not just taunting us, he's taunting our God. And his older brother comes out of nowhere and he's like, hey, you little shit, you better not have snuck out of taking care of our father's sheep just to watch the battle. And David's all like, fuck off, dude, I'm just asking a question. So Saul happens to hear that David is in the camp, and he sends for him. And David's like, listen, Saul, I got this. And Saul is like, no the fuck you do not got this. Goliath is fucking huge, and he has been training as a soldier since his youth. And you are still a youth. And David's like, look, I'm a shepherd. I've saved my father's flock from a bear and a lion before. This Philistine guy, he ain't shit, okay? And you know what? David has a totally valid point there. He's fought and killed things bigger than himself before. He's also planning to fight Goliath on his own terms where he has the advantage, but I will get to that in a bit. Problem now arises when David says, well, God rescued me from the bear and the lion, and he'll keep me safe from this Philistine guy. No, David, God did not save you from the bear and the lion. You killed the bear and the lion. It's your job, protect your father's flock. If God gave enough shits to protect David, he would never have been in a situation where he needed to kill a bear and a lion in the first place. They would have steered way clear of him if God had some sort of protective barrier around David and his family. That obviously was not there. And it kind of makes me sad, that so many religious people attribute all of their successes and talents and skills they've developed over the years to God's will or God's blessing or God looking out for them. When in reality, they created their own success through their own talents and efforts, and they're just not giving themselves any credit, really. So anyways, since David seems so determined, Saul gives David a suit of armor and a sword, but David ends up taking it off because he's not used to wearing armor and it's pretty heavy, so it's not really going to be super helpful for him. Instead, he gets his staff, his sling, and 5 smooth stones from a riverbed, and he goes out to the front lines to meet Goliath. So, pausing for a second here at the story, because one of the major points I'm trying to make in this video is to give credit where it's due, and I would be remiss if I did not cite my sources for this little next part. There is a great book called David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants by Malcolm Gladwell. It is an excellent nonfiction book written by one of my all-time favorite authors. I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. And the book is about how things that we often see as obvious disadvantages may in fact be helpful to you, and how things that we think of as advantages may not be advantageous in specific situations. It's, like I said, it's a great book. Highly recommend. Actually, I highly recommend anything by Malcolm Gladwell. He's one of my favorite authors of all time. Every book that I've read by him is really great. But anyway, the reason that I'm even bringing this book up is because he does a really interesting and thought-provoking analysis of the David and Goliath story, this biblical showdown that goes down. And I'm about to steal a couple of his points for the sake of this video, which is why then I'm promoting the book at the same time, because that's where I got some of this from. So, David goes out to meet Goliath, who's standing there with his shield bearer. He sees David as a handsome, healthy, young, pretty boy, and he's insulted. He's like, and this is a quote, he says, "Am I a dog that you're coming against me with sticks?" Now, let me emphasize that the majority of Bible translations that I read use the word sticks or staves, plural, not stick, singular. The only ones that I saw that used stick were pretty liberal with the translation, that they kind of changed the entire sentence structure to be more colloquial. So the only ones that I really saw that used stick, singular, had, pretty liberal translations. But my point is, David is only holding one stick, his staff. That's part of what he was bringing with him. Just one. So why is Goliath seeing more than one? Possible that maybe Goliath has very poor eyesight. He's also having someone carry a shield and walk in front of him, so that guy might be like his guide because of his eyesight issues, or it could be that he really just can't carry that shield on top of all the armor. Maybe he's not as strong as he looks. But the implication from this analysis is that maybe Goliath's bark is worse than his bite in combat. But nonetheless, I mean, in one-on-one combat, still pretty formidable. With all that armor and those big-ass weapons and his massive height, he would be quite a challenge in a one-on-one melee duel, which is exactly what he is challenged for any regular-sized guy to defeat. And all of these soldiers are thinking that that's what's going to happen. All of them are thinking in terms of rules of combat. When somebody challenges a duel, that's what they're thinking of. They're thinking of guy versus guy, sword versus sword type of thing. And all these soldiers are terrified of going up against Goliath because they're thinking, me with my armor and my sword versus a much bigger guy with his armor and his sword. Seems like they would be pretty obviously outmatched. But David is not a soldier. David is a shepherd, which is why he has not brought a sword and a shield. He has brought a sling. He is fighting on his own terms, with his own particular skill set that pretty much turns on its head any notions about the bigger, stronger guy being the obvious guy with the advantage. It really doesn't matter at all how big and strong Goliath is if David isn't coming at him with a sword, but he's coming at him with a sling, a rock, and devastating accuracy. So anyways, as Goliath is getting closer, he's taunting and threatening David, and David taunts and threatens him back, and he gives, I gotta say, it's a fucking great speech. If you're like a religious person who attributes all of their successes to God, it's like a very inspiring speech, but I'm not that person, so David takes his sling, puts one of the rocks in it, and he slings it, and the stone goes smack dab in the middle of Goliath's forehead. He falls face down on the ground. David grabs Goliath's sword and cuts his head off just to make sure the deed's done. The Philistines run away. The Israelites follow and capture them and pillage their camp. And David and Saul's son Jonathan become instant soulmates. The end. So, the main takeaway for me from this story is that despite the way the story is framed in modern culture, and even in the context of the Bible, to be a miraculous underdog victory that could only have been achieved with the hand of God intervening and helping him out, the reality is David had that victory in the bag on the merits of his own unconventional thinking and his skills as a slinger. And because of the way that David was fighting, Goliath's perceived advantages were in fact to his disadvantage. And yet, despite all of that, David credits his victory entirely to God. Guess that just goes to show how lazy the God of the Bible is, taking credit for something that he didn't have to interfere with at all to make happen. I do plan on covering more of David's story in the future, in particular an incident that involved a married woman. You might know her, but yeah, that'll be in the future. Anyways, that is it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like, leave a comment, and most importantly, share it, please. Again, I now have a Patreon, so if you want to support my work, please consider becoming a patron. The lowest patron tier is only $1 a month. Right now, I'm going to be putting that money towards getting new equipment for my videos, like tripods, lighting, pop filter for the microphone, and maybe even a backdrop. If you want to support my work financially, but you don't want to make a financial monthly commitment, I'm also linking in the description my Amazon wish list for all of that equipment, so if you want to buy some for me, that'd be great. Thank you. Follow me on Twitter at xcultbaby if you have not already. That's the social media I'm most active on. That's the place to kind of catch up with me. I also do Twitter polls for what kind of video I'm going to do next every now and then. So if you want to interact with me more and perhaps have some influence on what kind of content I'm going to put out, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. As always, I am xcultbaby, reminding you to go free yourself. Thank you for watching. Just wanted to give a quick shout out to my very first patron, Ethan Spencer. Thanks so much, dude, for sticking around as long as you have on my channel and continuing to support my work.